Hamishi, this is special for the Tayr Shluchim. I was going shopping for a robe for my wife, and then I realized that they have a hat, which this hat is good. If you're going to the mikveh with the robe, you have a hat for the mikveh. It's not a fancy bankrupt hat, but Shluchim, who needs to save money? People that are on a very important mission, $29. And the store is called Uniqlo, which is the Japanese store. First of all, let's check out the hat. Let's say a shliach wore this. Would they kick him off as shlichus if he wore this hat and he believed in the age of the earth according to science? What would get him kicked off shlichus faster? Let's see. So anyway, you get this hat. Let me talk to here on this. Okay, let's say you have to wear. So you could get away with it, Shabbos, Yom Tif, whatever. And then $29, and it might even go on sale. But how do you get it's 100% wool, maybe mixed with shatnez, one problem. And this company is from Japan, so it might be mixed up with some avodah zaros, because there's two types of avodah zaros in Japan, official state religions. And but it doesn't matter, because any shliach that knows a little bit of science knows that science already figured out that all other gods don't exist. Only our God exists. But so you don't have to worry about it. It's not mamish alikim acherim, like real ghosts or figures or angels. It's just the Eibishter said le'ilach alikim acherim al panai, that don't believe in fake stuff like fake science or fake. Ur-Kasdim. Avram was Ur-Kasdim, astrology and pseudoscience, v'chadoime. Okay, I'm gonna. Hi, how are you? I'm looking for those fedoras. It might be a girl's hat, but it was by the girl's robe. It's like a fedora.
I don't think we have any hats in here.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, don't be sorry. It says $29. There's a price tag in the hat. So I'll show it to you, and then if you're gonna sell it later, I'll come back later because I need the hat. I can't go to the Kinnis HaShluchim without that hat. I'll show you the. That one.
Oh, this one. Okay.
Yeah.
I think you just let me ask for you, okay?
Yes, thank you.
It's the only fedora we have in store. You can actually purchase it if you'd like, but if you want to check, there's more online. And at our flagship location, which is
okay. I'm gonna get a basket and I'm gonna grab this one.
I can get you a bag.
Is it coming back soon?
No, not to this store. They have it at the Beverly Center, but it's a special collaboration. So it's mainly like online.
It's unisex or because I don't mind, but I just wondered, is it unisex?
Well, it says women on the tag, but I mean
women on the tag. Yeah. I'll cut off the tag and I'm gonna give it to someone.
No.
Someone that's not allowed to. Okay. What does God think about cross-dressing? I'll leave you a link below. Now I'm getting I sent a couple of shirts. It's called Heat Tech. This is a cashmere sweater, right? Because I didn't have the Heat Tech today. But there's this garment that's only available. I hopped it from the sale rack, from the damaged, the returned, and all that. That says whatever the damage is, because they're sold out here. It's the winter season is over, and in Japan they sold out all of their Heat Tech. It was it's this idea that they had this basically a thin, long sleeve undershirt that keeps the heat in your body, and this way you're comfortable and warm. So I sent it to someone on Shlichus that lives in a place that's called Begashmias Uberuchnias. So it's a liberal arts. Okay, thanks. Yes. Thank you. I got it. Yeah. I just got the last hat, and he dumped it in the bag, which means it's like those Borsalinos that cost $590,000 that they fold up and they smash. We used to dream about hats that we could smash, because by Fabrengen, everybody wanted to see the Rebbe, so hats would fall on the floor and it would get busted. So you need a hat that could sustain a lot of abuse. $29. I got the last hat, but I'm going to research where you guys could get this hat online, so every shliach could get a $30 knetch, it's called. Now with the warm Heat Tech that we have, a few of them, they're basically it's like me telling you that I was in 770 like I'm a guy from some university that showed up to 770 and nobody gave me Shalom Aleichem, and then I went to some Ekvelt and the Shliach sat down, gave me Shalom Aleichem and learned with me 3 Maimorim, Hamsheichim from the Rebbe Rashab, right? So the store is a Japanese establishment that sold out in Japan, and in America I chopped all the last ones and sent it to my friends and family. So that's like amazing, the Vart. Okay, speaking about Shlichus, an amazing story I have to share with you. So here's a story about a Shliach and his classmate of a year or two, not really close, but acquaintance. So Shliach talks to him and says to him, your wife is not a match for you because they're not living a halachically observant life. So just to make it clear, this is a hergish, right? It's not something that the guy himself would ask a local Rav and get the same answer. And if you want to know what to do, you don't ask someone, what's your hergish, right? Because what if his hergish is a cruel hergish, or uneducated hergish, or an uneducated hergish that usually uneducated leads to cruelty, like you have in Gaza Strip with these kids who get their morality from the Quran. So here you have a guy who's a healthy shliach, on a healthy shlichus from a good family with a smicha that it's worthless, but still, he went through a system and he didn't, and he sat inside, he played the part. Now, I'm going to demonstrate and quantify and qualify the story without any names of any sides, because, of course, then I could share the story fully without pulling any punches, so you can get the beautiful picture of the story. It's an amazing lesson for shlichus. Isaac Asimov says that if we can't go by reason, what could we go by? If we go by faith, I have my faith and you have your faith. You think your God is and your prophet is the last prophet in the world if you're a Muslim, and I have a faith that I follow the Torah, and in that they have a Hasidic and I have Litvish, different feelings and different faiths. So if we don't go by reason, Isaac Asimov, the science writer, says, what could we go by, right? We can't go by faith. So he shared something that was a hergish. So the guy tells him, listen, why would I take your advice if the Rav, and I know I have koilalim and you're a Lubavitch or Bechlal, people would question if your whole halacha education is correct, meaning that it meets the mainstream Judaism, right? Rabbinic Judaism is the mainstream Judaism. He tried playing a game and he said to him, there's no such thing as Rabbinic Judaism, there's only authentic Judaism. So right away, that question is, where does Chabad fall into that, right? So obviously Chabad is Hasidic mixed with Rabbinic. It's the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek with Mishalev, Nigle, and Sod. It's not completely Kabbalistic Judaism. It's not everybody could catch Malachim as they wish. They have to follow a standard. But it's not completely Rabbinic because it's a spiritual religion. It's based on Makif and Debina, sleeping in Sukkah or not sleeping in Sukkah, based on some magical experience of mitzdayer. You're mitzdayer because your Rebbe can't sleep with the makifin, right? So that's a spiritual component. So he says to him, you're in the mud and you don't want to get out of the mud. So he asks him back, what is mud? And he, of course, can't answer that. So he keeps on circular logic, which is very embarrassing for a Rav of Judaism today, because Judaism is the most mechubadik religion from all three. It used to be that the Yidden had to learn a little bit from Christianity, like Rabbeinu Gershom Ragoyla, who had to learn monogamy from the Goyim and incorporate it into Yiddishkeit with Exeda, but then takes time until modernity and enlightenment grows that it can go to Achenu B'nai Yisrael Asfardim and things like that. But we have stories, and then of course Islam used to be ahead of Christianity. People would come from London and try to get into the academies with the famous movie The Physician. Paints a very clear picture of the time by Avicenna, or other known as Ibn Sina. Avicenna is, I think that's who the Rambam was influenced by him, by this philosopher who was a doctor, who gave a class in medicine. In the movie, one Christian boy, whether it's historic or not, pretends to be a Jew in order to get into the academy and learns with the Muslims, who were the wealthy class. They were the ruling class there, and the Jews were tolerated guests because then they had a Shah. This was in Iran, and the Shah tolerated Jews, and the country was very advanced, and they got their morality from philosophy and from science. and not from the Quran. So that there were, like you have today, the mullahs and Khomeini. So at the time, this was maybe the year 900. They were, I may be off with the year, that's the relevant, you could look it up. The movie's called The Physician, you can get it on Netflix, I'll leave a link. And at the time, the fundamentalists were not the ruling class. So here you're talking about a rabbi in Yiddishkeit who has to, his education is so poor that he has to be ashamed of his opinion. So he says to the guy, you know better. That's why I'm not playing nice with you. I'm being mean to you. I'm telling you that about your wife, and that I disapprove of your marriage. Which, since when does Judaism disapprove of the institution of marriage? Since when do we, just because a marriage is not done halachically, and the people are not living halachic observant life, which is the case with most educated Jews today, they observe but culturally, not halachically. Unless you indoctrinate, you're not going to get someone to keep halacha, because halacha, it's not a civil law anymore. After the age of enlightenment, everybody chose what was halacha, and then halacha keeps changing and advancing, Baruch Hashem. Now I heard that the rabbis have a new rule on organ donations. So halacha is, Baruch Hashem, being led by science, right? And I told this guy who should tell the shliach that Bechlal, there's a group of poskim today who are very educated, and they are the mainstream poskim of Yiddishkeit. They're not extreme right. They're not going to kick Chabad out, because just because Chabad has magicians and messiahs doesn't mean that you have to cancel out the whole Chabad. They're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Chabad has a very important mission in Yiddishkeit. It may not be koilel Judaism. Chabad's goals are not to build koilelim, and a lot of shluchim out there, well, I say they can learn Chassidus, but that's my field that I researched myself. But that's because in yeshiva we weren't taught Chassidus properly. What's the origin of Chassidus? Where does it come from? What's Zohar? What's Arizal? What's the difference? Where did Moses Leon get his information from? Plotinus, how he translated the Mir Nevuchim for himself, a special translation he wanted. Things we know that are available to us about these writers. And you want to believe that the Zohar is from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's up to you. That's your belief. But I go with the consensus of scholars. So he mentioned some nonsense about to him about rabbinic. There's no such thing as rabbinic Judaism. This is a non-starter. So stupid. And then he doesn't know what Stukim and Baisusim. He never read the Dead Sea Scrolls. What kind of crap is that? Rabbi Ben Zakkai. So he says no. There's only authentic Judaism. So that leads to another problem, which is, he says, I go by what the university says, because the university has an open collection of all sources. And when you collect from all sources, you get, just like precious metals, you melt it down and you get the best opinion of all of them, right? You have many theories on the Dead Sea Scrolls, many ways to read the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's the ways that the Christians, Father DeVoe, was reading it, and they were looking at everybody like monks, and they were looking at it in their hashkafa of their way. So you read many opinions on the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's many twists and ideas that you can take from it and learn. And even Gary Rensburg of Rutgers University finished 24 lectures on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he finishes 24 lectures with an appeal that we should tolerate each other, because everybody has their way of worshiping God, or some don't worship at all, but they do it through acts of goodness and kindness, as the Rebbe said to the CNN about the Mashiach's arrival. So the Father DeVoe, you can see one way. So Gary Rensburg says at the end of the lecture, not as a professor, as a bakasha, sounding more like a mashpia by a Fabrengen, says, let us stray far from this path of saying that the other guy's shitta is not good and not authentic. Because clearly there were 4 types of Judaism at the time, before Rabbinic Judaism took hold after the Prushim, and from the Prushim came the Gemara, which the Talmud is the longest, vast, and longest period of Judaism until Baal Shem Tov or Shabtai Tzvi and things like that, when the Rabbinic started to give way to other forms of Judaism, worshiping God through nature, and turning it into more of a Buddhist practice where God there's a tzimtzum, and then it's like the same. If you look up the different forms of understandings of God, you'll have a much better, broader view. So he says mud. He can't explain mud, and I'm telling you, this is a normal shliach, a very good-looking, handsome, looks like a good neighborhood, good, not in a cheap zip code, and people don't take him seriously in terms of his seichel, because he's teaching probably JLI and all these apologetics. but they look at him and think this is a serious guy. This is a guy that you see him at a party, you'll give him shalom aleichem until you scratch the surface, which is what we're doing. And this is a beautiful lesson for a young bachrim who go out on shlichus, how to make sure you get your education not from some hergish or some myth or some fabrengen, as Rabbi Ashkenazi in Kfar Chabad said about the Mashiach campaign before he passed away. I remember at a big rally in Kfar Chabad, he said, whatever we say at a fabrengen is not for the hafatzas hamayanos. Now we're talking about reason and faith, right? So he says to the guy, but you know better. Meaning you were raised in Crown Heights, so you know better. Let me explain to you exactly what this you know better means. It's a cultish practice. It's a practice where you tell someone you were indoctrinated, so we expect of you to be stupid and not have good questions, not have critical thinking, just to follow. That's what and I'll tell you exactly how that is. There was a boy who I know from Lakewood, many years, who took 4 boys from Lakewood, Simchas Beis HaSheva, to Crown Heights. Comes back to Lakewood, his teacher, and at the time it was around the hype of the Mashiach after Gimel Tammuz, but lots of Tzfatim were trying to establish their place in Crown Heights. So it was really hot, and it was after Gimel Tammuz, and this is when, so he says to his student, you're a smart guy, you're a cup bacher with a good heart. And these 4 guys, if they want to go party, they'll go where they want. So they wanted action. They couldn't do Simchas Beis HaSheva here in Lakewood. They had to go to Crown Heights. Thank God for that. They could have went somewhere else, even more questionable, right? But he says to the older, not to the older, but the more wiser bacher, who's like who they look up to in the yeshiva, and he says to him, you know better. So you know better to take them to Crown Heights, where he considers them to be problematic in many ways. Because, like I said, Judaism is against messiahs. The Rabbanim, the Chachamim, were against having messiahs and magicians. So if you have one Rebbe that people, Hasidim, unshamingly try to make him into both in one, a messiah and a magician, so you're going to have big bumps on the road, right? So this is he says to him, you know better. How can you do that? That's cult practice, because the boy, as he grew older, and I told him, there's nothing wrong with Chabad. It's just that the Rebbe extended himself to a lot of impoverished people, many people with superstitions. Napoleon said this, and Napoleon was all about getting rid of organized religion, taking away the power from the Galachim and giving the people their rights. But Napoleon said, you're never going to take away from the masses their superstitious beliefs. So if a guy wants to kiss the Rebbe's cheer, or he thinks that the Rebbe's magical dollars is going to cure his headache, and instead of taking a Tylenol, it's much more not homeopathic, what do you call it? It's much more naturalistic to go put the Rebbe's magical dollar on your head and get rid of a headache. You can't take that away from people. Wherever there's ignorance and lack of education, you're going to have such people believing in such myths. Doesn't make Chabad questionable just because the masses have a Rebbe. One guy who reaches out to the masses, it's not the Rebbe that's a Rosh Yeshiva for Bnei Torah, but for men, women, and children, Yidden, Goyim, everybody. It's a Hasidic Rebbe, right? It's like a mystic. So he says, look, I took them there because they had fun and they never went off the derech. And even if they did, it's not Chabad that took them off the derech, because Chabad doesn't have a concept of going off the derech. Chabad, when a boy goes off the derech in Lakewood, it's a choice that he makes that's very borderline cut clear. But in Chabad, there's nothing to leave. It's a social thing. It's a more of a friendly achtastic thing. So there's no need to actually leave your friends, because it's not that strict of a cult, right? It's not a cult. The truth is that Chabad is not a cult. There's no only a cult. You're not allowed to leave. Chabad, you're allowed to leave. And same with Judaism. But this yokel shliach lowlife, that I'm sorry to use these words because I must dictate, beracho bitcha ktana. This lowlife, this shame to the Rebbe, this shame to Shlichus, this garbage, that it would be better a shliach that was an apikoris because he was educated, Einstein, for example, in that neighborhood, that represents the Rebbe, than this garbage that represents his hergish. And he doesn't know that Yiddishkeit has Rabbanim and Chachamim and Moirei Hira, and he's not a Moirei Hira, he's garbage. Because if this guy was interested in keeping halachically observant life, he would go to his local Rav and say, here's my story. I went off the derech not because anybody abused me, I went off the derech